All right. Thanks, Sam. Welcome back. This is the Myrna Method live stream. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag, and my goal is to bring you impactful nutrition information that can really significantly change your life. Because nutrition done right changes your life. So what we're going to talk about in this video is the keto diet. And it's not necessarily that the keto diet's all bad. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute, Myrna, you've talked about some of the ill effects of the keto diet. Yes, true. But then there's some positive things that go on biochemically also. And I think it's well deserving to talk about both and then summarize and bring it home as to, is it a diet I should do or I shouldn't do? First of all, as a registered dietitian, especially clinical dietitian, there's going to be times that I'm going to recommend diets for patients that may not be mainstream, okay? But a mainstream diet, or what I'm going to call the basic holy grail of diets, which is what I teach people, has to do with how to balance the macronutrients, protein, fiber, carbs, and fat. In this diet, the keto diet, it takes those macronutrients and it puts it at a different percentage. And that's what we're going to talk about, is what happens chemically when those macronutrients are put in the ketogenic diet percentages. So Sam, if you'll switch over the PowerPoint, I think we're ready to roll. So, is the keto diet right for you? That's the question. So first of all, let's figure out, what is the ketogenic diet? So it's a high-fat, low-carb, moderate protein diet with the goal, and this is, literally an explanation of what most people see as the ketogenic diet, is that it aims to reduce body fat and improve metabolic health. Now, I'm going to bring you the science on that so you can really understand, is this true? Is this what it really does? And to some extent, it does. But there's other places that it may actually cause harm to your metabolism. We'll talk about that. So let's get into what the ketogenic diet means from a perspective of the macronutrients. Remember, that's carbs, protein, fats, and fiber. It shows that with a basic diet, this is the recommended dietary food pyramid, they're showing the carbohydrates and fat literally almost switched, right? So you're showing with the basic diet pyramid, high carbs, moderate protein, low fat or lower fat, and then with the keto diet, higher fat, moderate protein, low carbs. So it's basically the flip of it. And what type of foods are we referring to? Well, avocados, high-fat foods, meats, salmon, nuts, olive oil, cheeses, butters. These are all the foods that are higher in fat, and they're going to be low in carbs. Now, according to Public Medicine, PubMed, the reason why people do a keto diet. Here's some basic reasons on the internet. This is, everybody gets it. They get on the internet. It decreases overall body fat and it improves metabolic health. Those are the two reasons that I see most people will turn to the keto diet. It helps patients with diabetes. It helps reduce their A1C. It reduces the need for insulin. It decreases hunger. The keto diet can help people feel full and satisfied because it focuses on fat instead of carbohydrates, which are quickly absorbed and used for energy. I am just giving you the reason why people do the keto according to getting on the internet. We're going to take some of this and we're going to debunk it in this video. Get right down to the nitty-gritty on the science of every one of these statements. The keto diet can help stabilize energy and stabilize blood sugar. It improves brain function and concentration. It reduces seizure frequency in half the people with a drug-resistant epilepsy. And it starves cancer cells. So when you're reading about a ketogenic diet and you're looking at all these things, basically in Public Medicine and some of the medical journals, you're thinking to yourself, why wouldn't I do this program? Well, let's get the whole story on the keto diet. I brought some more Google searches because I think it's interesting to see when people bring it up on the cons for the keto diet. And some of the things that make it not so desirable, it has nutritional deficiencies, which it does, and we'll go over some of those. Constipation, keto flu. It talks about heart disease being a real problem. But interesting, when I look at the reason why you would do a ketogenic diet, it talks about heart disease being a benefit, which is just darn right confusing. So in one Google search, it shows heart disease as being not so good of a reason why to do the keto. And in another search, it shows it as a benefit for doing the keto. So we're going to really get down to which one is it. It also can cause some liver and kidney problems, disordered eating, and that's going to be absolutely true because it creates an imbalance in those macronutrients, which creates a chemical misfit for your body. I'm not going to get into that with this video because I have talked about how the macronutrients like to keep this homeostasis. But the keto diet, that is not a homeostasis. It is definitely an imbalance of a lot more fats than what would be recommended. It also can be a benefit and a con, a good and a bad for blood pressure, just like heart disease. We got both sides of this. And it also, for long-term health risks, can increase kidney stones, osteoporosis, liver disease. So these are basically what we find. We go on the internet, we're looking at all the reasons why you wouldn't do a keto diet, and then we look at all the reasons why we would. Weight loss. It reduces appetite. It improves blood sugar. It lowers your risk for heart disease. Okay, one says it increases it, the other one says it lowers it. It also lowers your risk for blood pressure. It reduces inflammation. It can create higher energy levels for some of the people that have reported to be on it, which I can show you how it can be a con and actually reduce energy level. And it also eliminates processed foods. And I think we can all agree with that. That's one of the good things of it. So let's get right into the science on this, because I think that when we're looking, let me just also as far as some of the cons, there are some definite nutrition deficiencies if you are on the keto diet. You've got to make sure to take a good B supplement, B vitamins. Make sure they're methylated. It's a folate instead of the folic, methylated B12, vitamin C, and then some of the bone builders we're not going to see on keto diet is much. We need to take a supplementation of vitamin D, some calcium, magnesium. These are some of the minerals that you're not going to see as prevalent on the keto diet. Also, there is a water imbalance that I'm going to talk about, and this can reduce some of the electrolyte imbalances. Sodium, you can be low on sodium, and this is where we can see a plus for the blood pressure, because with the keto diet, because it is reducing some of the water out of the cells, that's what a keto diet will do, because with a diet, you have carbohydrates. Just the word carbo meaning fuel, hydrate means water. When carbohydrates get broken down, they get into the muscles and they hydrate with water. So every gram of a carbohydrate binds with 3 grams of water inside the cell. So when you reduce the carbohydrates, you reduce the water, you reduce the hydration at a cellular level, and this can mean that the sodium, some of these electrolytes, will be less. And this is where with blood pressure, we can see a decrease in blood pressure because it's actually affecting the hydration. So that's the nitty-gritty on the supplements. Let's get right into the science. And I think to really explain this well, I need to go into my whole rant, which you know in almost all my videos, I do talk about type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. But I believe that this is the biggest epidemic right now in our country, and it's the leading culprit for obesity, for cardiovascular disease. And if you're not talking about this particular biochemistry here and trying to relate it to the keto diet, then you're really missing the big picture, I think. So let's get into understanding the chemistry behind why it is such a weight loss benefit to be on a keto diet. Is it really a weight loss benefit? Does it really reduce the appetite? So here's how it works with your body in regards to eating carbohydrates. Whenever you eat a carbohydrate, it breaks down to glucose, and this glucose enters the bloodstream. Now, at the same time the glucose enters the bloodstream, the pancreas releases a hormone, insulin. Now, the main goal of glucose is to get inside the muscle cells and get inside the brain cells.
I need to fix the camera.
Oh, okay. So we got a little technical issue. Sam's working on it. Let me know when you're up. Are they not able to see the PowerPoint?
No, they can see the PowerPoint. I just need to fix your camera real quick.
Okay.
Stop touching the mic, please.
Okay. No, don't touch anything.
Okay, there we go.
All right, we're in. So what happens is, thank you, Sam. Thank goodness for Sam. So the insulin attaches to the receptor site on the muscle cell. And hold on a minute. I think let me bring back my, there we go. Okay, so insulin attaches to the receptor site on the muscle cell, also the receptor site on some neuronal cells in the brain. This talks to a messenger who talks to another messenger and brings up a transporter that literally comes to the surface of the muscle cell, comes to the surface of some of these brain cells, and this is what allows the glucose inside the cell. So at this point, this transporter, glucose transporter number 4, allows the glucose in the cell, and this is when 1 gram of glucose binds with 3 grams of water. So this is when you're doing the carbohydrate diets, you're going to find there's going to be more hydration, and when you go on a low carb diet like a keto diet, you are going to lose a lot of water from your cells. And I really do believe for athletes this can be a real problem because it really causes a dehydration at a cellular level. And if you're really active, this could be a problem because you can drink all the water you want. But when you're not having a lot of carbohydrates in the muscle, it doesn't really help the muscle hydrate as well as it could when you're bringing in the carbs, which is why when you go on a keto diet, right, and you bring back the carbs, you find you gain 5 pounds in 2 days, which is really impossible. You're not really doing that. Or when you start a keto diet, you'll notice you'll lose a lot of weight quickly. Well, a lot of this is water weight. But the other thing that's very interesting as far as creating this imbalance in our macronutrients is when you reduce the carbs from the muscle, you do lose the water weight, which is a real benefit with a lot of people starting a weight loss program because they see the keto diet as something that they can lose a lot of weight quickly. But a lot of that is water weight. But the other thing that happens is when the glycogen, that's the stored glucose in the muscle, becomes low, it signals the brain to crave more carbs, which is what makes the keto diet not sustainable, is because you feel like you need a cheat day. Now, from a positive standpoint, as far as controlling the appetite, there is some benefits there. So let's talk about that. Number 1, let me repeat, when you drop a lot of carbs from the muscle can be low in glycogen, low in stored glucose. This signals the brain for a craving for more carbs. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of times the keto diets are not really sustainable, because you find you're craving carbs. You do great Monday through Friday and you know how it's working for you, not so well on the weekend, because you're going to find you're binging and cheating, and it's really hard to maintain that low carbs when you're active especially and muscles are craving them. But from an appetite perspective, let's go to insulin and talk about some of the benefits. When you reduce the carbs from the diet, so when you have a diet that's reducing the carbohydrates, you also reduce the insulin. Now, this is where a lot of people see the benefit with lowering their A1C. So if they're diabetic, they're all excited because they don't have glucose in the blood and their A1C is going down, and it looks to be that they're really getting an improvement in their diabetic condition. But this is where it gets a little wacky, because that's truly not the case. Because you lower the sugar in the blood does not mean that you are reversing type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance or type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's. And instead of happening in the muscle, insulin resistance happens in the brain. So let's see what I'm talking about. When you eat the glucose, when you eat the carbs, it turns to glucose. The glucose then releases the insulin. The goal of the insulin is to attach to the receptor site, which talks to a messenger, allows the transporter to the surface to allow the glucose in. But what happens is this receptor becomes clogged. In other words, it becomes resistant to insulin's action. So insulin's trying to tell the muscle cell to take in the glucose, but it cannot do it. And the reason why is because it is disabled because of too much fat. Excess fatty acids that can come from a lot of fat cells or from a lot of dietary fat. So a ketogenic diet is a lot of excess fatty acids. You're going to get a lot of fats. So with the keto diet, you're going to have a lot of these excess fatty acids accumulating in muscle cells. Now, here's a benefit of the keto diet. If you're truly on a keto diet, when these fatty acids turn to ketones, then they're stable in this ketone state. But if you're eating a high-fat diet and you're binging on the weekends and you're on some days and off on other days and you're not consistent, then these fatty acids turn to a type of fat called a ceramide, which is a very damaging fat. And I've talked about this in a lot of my other videos. These ceramides, these damaging fats, that's from eating a high-fat diet, not staying consistent with the keto diet, because ketones cannot turn to ceramides chemically, but high fats do. A diet with excessive fats can be highly inflammatory. But on a keto diet, they're not seeing as much inflammation for a couple reasons. Because ceramides do not get generated, so a lot of high-fat diets that are not keto, they're just doing a lot of processed foods and eating a lot of avocados and nuts, maybe healthy fats, but just too much of them. But they're not doing strictly a keto diet. This can actually increase inflammation. So with a keto diet, what we're finding is that some of the inflammation markers do get reduced. Now, I want to say that a ketogenic diet really isn't a balanced diet in reference to the macronutrients. I'm not going to talk about it in depth in this video, but when the macronutrients are not properly balanced, you will have a really tough time sustaining it, and you will get a rebound effect. In other words, you'll lose a lot of weight on the keto diet and you'll gain it all back. And when I talk about a ketogenic diet, I'm talking about this high-fat diet. Did you have a question, Sam?
What do you mean by balance?
So when I'm talking about balance, I'm talking in reference to the macronutrients, protein, carbs, fats, and fibers, and how you bring them in at a certain percentage, okay? I don't want to really get into it in this video. The point I'm making is that a keto diet is not percentage-wise at this homeostasis. The fat percentages, typically we want them 25 to 35%. In a keto diet, they're as much as 75 to 90%. So there's some benefits, but there are some things that are not so good. It's tough to sustain. So when you're on a keto and off a keto and then on a keto and off a keto, that's about the worst possibility, because you're creating a lot of biochemical mayhem. The biggest problem with a high-fat diet is going to be with diabetes, because even with a ketogenic diet, the chance of getting these receptor sites flooded with excess fats, even though you're not getting the ceramides, even though they're not as inflammatory as they could be, you're still getting a situation where you are causing this insulin resistance. Now, where it gets super tricky is that you're causing excess fatty acids to clog up the receptor site, which means these transporters are not going to get the communication to come to the surface of the cell, and you're going to have a lot of excess fats, excess glucose trying to get into the muscle cell, and that glucose goes into a fat cell because insulin can easily attach to a fat cell and bring in all the glucose into being fat. Now, with the keto diet, what we're seeing is that these still happen. You can still increase the receptor sites to become insulin resistant, to become resistant to the communication of insulin. But where it gets confusing, because you're on a low-carb diet, you have less sugar in the blood. So the A1C is the measurement of the sugar in the blood, not the measurement of how diabetic you're becoming. The root cause of diabetes is when these receptor sites become disabled because of a lot of fat, and the signaling in the cell is not allowing the sugar in the cell. But if you don't eat a lot of glucose, in other words, you're on a ketone diet, you're never really going to notice this is going on until you get off the keto diet. You start eating regular, and you're going to notice your A1C is going to climb probably higher than it did even before the keto diet because you produced a condition of more insulin resistance, but it got masked because you did not eat the carbohydrates, so your A1C was really low. And this is a really big issue that I see with a lot of people and not understanding the biochemistry behind type 2 diabetes, is because they are seeing a low-carb diet and their doctor's applauding them because their A1C goes down, and they say your diabetes is improving. What is improving are the symptoms of diabetes. What's improving is less sugar in the blood, which means your A1C, some of your markers are lower. But it's not a true indication of what's going on in the receptor sites. So I think when we look at a keto diet, there's some misconceptions on that it's not really improving diabetes from the standpoint of the root cause, but it is improving blood sugar, which means it's improving the symptoms of the disease. What we want to do in the Myrna Method, what I teach is I actually teach people how to balance their diet and reduce insulin resistance without having to do a keto diet. So a keto diet is harder to sustain. It's not a balanced diet, but it does have some positive benefits, which is what I'm going over in this video. So with the keto diet, one of the benefits for weight loss is that, number one, you're not going to get the hunger. And I'm going to say there's some truth to that, and let me explain. Whenever you have a lot of insulin in the blood, because maybe you released a lot of glucose, so you ate a lot of carbs, you had a lot of glucose in the blood, you're going to have a lot of insulin. Whenever there's a lot of insulin in the blood, and by the way, the more diabetic you become, the more insulin resistant you become, the more the pancreas is going to release even more insulin. So the more fats you eat, the more you clog up these receptor sites, the more insulin your pancreas is going to release. Okay, so you're going to be more susceptible to diabetes, and you're going to be hungrier. Because whenever we have an excess of insulin in the blood, we have hunger increasing. That's part of a lot of insulin. You're a diabetic, you have insulin resistance, you're going to be hungrier because of this situation. So what happens with the keto diet is that when we reduce the sugar, we reduce the insulin, which then reduces the hunger. So there's a lot of truth with the keto diet that when you do have less sugar, you're going to have less insulin, and the appetite will seem easier to control. But this is what the diet's doing, but this is not necessarily, from a registered dietitian standpoint, how I would want people to eat. I'd want them to understand how to balance the macronutrients correctly. Now, I will go through some certain medical conditions where a keto diet can serve some benefit. But typically when you have a medical condition, you're at an imbalance. Your body's not running a perfect ship. You've got a couple imbalances going on, which sometimes you have to do diets that aren't like everybody else would do because you're trying to eradicate, you're trying to control some of the symptoms from this clinical condition that you have. So we'll go through some of those symptoms. Bottom line, with the ketogenic diet, you do get a lot of excess fatty acids. You do cause more problems with diabetes. Although you reduce the sugar, you increase the root cause of the disease. These ceramides with a high-fat diet are also very disruptive in the membrane of the cells. This can cause inflammation. One thing with the keto diet is they do not turn to ceramide. So I will say from an inflammatory standpoint, there is some benefit there. So let's talk about the keto diet from a therapeutic value. And I pulled a case study on inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, which is just from one of the studies, where it can actually help in this case. Also epilepsy, Alzheimer's, some neurodegenerative diseases, particularly with Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes. Let me go back to my graph here. When I talk about insulin resistant in the muscle cell, it also takes place in the brain cells. So these neuronal cells that have these insulin receptor sites, also with a lot of excess fats, can become disabled. And this is just like this is type 2 diabetes, this becomes type 3 diabetes. Because similar to the muscle cell, you are not getting this transporter to come to the surface of these brain cells, and you're going to have a lot of sugar that goes into other cells that it shouldn't, because it's not going into the ones that it should, because these receptor sites are not doing their job. And this is type 3 diabetes, also known as Alzheimer's. So yes, if you have type 3 diabetes and you have these receptor sites, you have this diabetic condition, and you're not able to get sugar into the cell, then absolutely, when you do a keto diet, you're having less sugar in circulation. So because you have the disease, you're going to see the benefit. But once again, the goal is to try to get you to eat correctly without having to do the ketogenic diet to reduce this clogging of these receptor sites. So with the keto diet, the benefit there is if you have Alzheimer's and we're reducing the sugar, then we're reducing the symptoms of the disease. As far as cancer cells, there are some studies, the Wahlberg effect. I'm not going to get into it with this video. Not 100% conclusive, but there are some interesting studies on that. And as far as metabolic disorders and morbid obesity and type 2 diabetes, this to me is inclusive. This is not conclusive because of what I just showed you. Because they don't really look at the root cause, what's causing the disease. They're focusing on the sugar in the blood. So because you reduce the sugar in the blood and you reduce the symptom, it is a short-term positive effect, but long-term, you're not reducing the disease. This is going to come from eating a balanced diet of macronutrients, exercising, and understanding actually how to eat, and not having to depend on a keto diet to try to do some short-term fixes. But it does do some short-term fixes, which is what I'm trying to show here. Let's talk about a case study. A 24-year-old who had ulcerative colitis. So ulcerative colitis is an inflammatory bowel disease, and it's where that intestinal tract forms these blisters. A lot of studies show it's because they lack enzymes to break down hydrogen sulfide, which is from breaking down certain foods. So with this disease, these patients lack enzymes to not have the disease. And there's a lot of studies. Why do they get it? What's the story behind it? We're not going to talk about it in this video, but what I'm trying to shed light on is they do have some imbalances in their gut. Some enzymes aren't working like they should. And what they found is with the keto diet, with some of these patients, they saw remission. So with the keto diet, we're not getting a lot of fermentation with certain foods, which may not create some of this hydrogen sulfide, which is the enzyme they lack to break down the hydrogen sulfide. And excess of this hydrogen sulfide causes these blisters. That's part of this ulcerative colitis. So there's science behind why a keto diet may be helpful. But from a dietitian's perspective, we can also do a diet more conducive with ulcerative colitis. You don't have to do keto, where we can reduce some of these foods to create this hydrogen sulfide. So there is another way to balance the diet to help with ulcerative colitis. But I'm going to mention, absolutely, the keto diet has shown, especially in this case study, that it was a benefit. But also with this keto diet, there was another side to it that I really wanted to talk about, is the elevated lipid panel. And remember I said that with the keto diet, we see some studies that show it actually benefits the cardiovascular system, and then other ways it doesn't. So I'm going to talk to you how it benefits and when it doesn't. When it doesn't, it's because the lipid panel, these are the cholesterols, become elevated. In this case, with this particular case study, it showed that it was twice the threshold of the high risk. And in this case, I'm going to show you the panel of this particular case study, this 24-year-old. When he was not doing the keto diet, his cholesterol was 160. On the keto diet, his cholesterol was 450. Now his HDLs improved, which HDLs are the good cholesterols, but his bad cholesterols went to 321. Those are the LDLs, and before they were at 95. So we want our cholesterol below 200. So at 160, he was doing really well. But on the ketogenic diet, his cholesterol went to 450. His LDLs, which are the low density lipid proteins, we want them under 100, and he was at 321. And honestly, with my patients, this is what I do see. When I'm bringing in a lot of the fats above that 35%, I see the lipid panel also start to get really high. Doctors then want to put them on statins. But this is an example of somebody that did a keto, and immediately we see the lipid panel changing. Now, with the lipid panel, in all fairness, we are not looking at all the information. A lot of times doctors just get the cholesterols, the LDLs, HDLs, and they don't look at the particle number, they don't look at the particle size. In this particular case, this person had larger LDLs, not smaller. So the smaller ones are the ones that are stickier and more damaging. So your cholesterols come in sizes. And the bigger they are, if they're the bad ones, the better off you are. But if they're smaller, they're stickier. So in this particular study, they're saying, well, wait a minute. He's got small LDLs. Now, I'm saying to you, there's not enough science out there yet to make me feel like, okay, this is going to be okay. Because an elevated lipid panel, by most standards, most doctors, they're not going to support this because we have too much evidence that shows that a high lipid panel in these elevated levels over time creates plaque in the arteries. Now, this guy's 24 years old. We're not going to see it for a couple years, but his APOB, which we really like it under 70 or at least under 80, and in this case, he's 183. He's got a genetic mutation of what's called the lipo(a), which is another form of bad cholesterol. We want to have that under 75. He was at 109, but he's up at 168. When we look at some of these other damaging ones, particularly the oxidated LDL, that was 39, he's at 78. These are oxidizing LDLs in the actual artery. We don't want these fats to be oxidizing because this is what triggers the immune system and can trigger some of this atherosclerosis, some of this plaque. But his inflammatory values, let's see if I find it here. His CRP went from 1 down to 7. So his inflammation did decrease, but we know it's because his gut got better. He put his inflammatory bowel disease in remission with the keto diet, so that's where a lot of this inflammation was happening. But if you look at the third one down, where it says oxidated LDLs, this over time can be a highly inflammatory condition in the artery, continuing in a high-fat diet. So I'm just reporting what I know at this point, because I look at those medical journals, and there are some journals that are saying, well, we're not sure that high lipids are a bad thing. And in this particular study, they can't deny that there's some definite inflammatory conditions that can go on in the artery, but they also, and I really am not comfortable yet, because they refer to hypothesis, and we look at it as from the standpoint that we're sort of inciting that we think it's not yet bona fide science, all right? But I respect the fact that it does lower some inflammation, like I've said, in the sense that it doesn't produce ceramides. And the other area, and this is the biggest positive side of a keto diet, and why we see inflammatory markers go down, why we're seeing cardiovascular disease improve. So why is a diet like the keto diet, which I'm saying has high fats, can cause the type 2 diabetes, because it can get up there and cause dysfunction in that receptor site. Like I said, your doctor's not going to notice it because your A1C, your blood sugar reading's going to go down, but that doesn't mean the root cause of type 2 diabetes, those insulin receptor sites, will become more and more disabled. But let's talk about the real positive side to a keto diet. And that's going to be these short chain fatty acids. And I'm going to explain what they are. And in this particular study, they talked about the potential health benefits of the ketogenic diet. And they refer here, and I'm going to read straight from the narrative of the study, once fats are utilized as a primary fuel source in the liver, the production of ketone bodies begins, a process known as ketogenesis. During the ketosis stage, 3 major ketone bodies are formed: acetone, acetoacetate, and beta hydroxybutyrate. These folks are short-chain fatty acids. These are ketones. They happen when you are in starvation, on a ketosis diet, you're on a ketone diet, or you have real extreme physical exertion, you're going to get these ketones. Now, why are these ketones a good thing? Well, these ketones actually can attach, let me find those. Here we go. The ketones attach, well, first of all, let me explain some things about short-chain fatty acids. They're produced in the liver from a starvation diet, excess physical exertion, and a keto diet produce these ketones, but they also are produced through gut fermentation, and they produce acetate, propionate, and butyrate. They also form short-chain fatty acids. So you get them on a ketone diet, and you get them through fermenting plant foods. It's the fermentation of plant foods. Fiber in the gut produces these short-chain fatty acids, these chemicals. A ketone diet, a ketosis diet where you're producing these ketones, are also producing these short-chain fatty acids. So what are so great about these short-chain fatty acids? Well, the ones made in the gut, they circulate. The ones made from ketones also circulate. And these short-chain fatty acids attach to receptor sites on cells. So many cells have receptor sites. The gut has receptor sites. The immune cells have receptor sites. Chromosomes have receptor sites. The mitochondria, cardiometabolic cells. So when you think of a cell, your cells have these little receptor sites. And on these receptor sites, they're just waiting for certain compounds to attach. These short-chain fatty acids and some of the receptor sites are free fatty acid receptor sites 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these are located at different areas of the body. And as soon as these short-chain fatty acids attach to these receptor sites, they create benefits within the cell. For immune cells, they make immune cells able to fight infection better. They create a positive effect in the chromosomes, which I'm going to explain that. So when these short-chain fatty acids attach to these receptor sites, they do positive things. So that's why a plant-based diet is regarded to be so healthy. And also, I want to talk about these short-chain fatty acids can also circulate in the brain and reduce appetite. Now, remember, I talked about if you reduce the insulin in the blood, you reduce appetite. Well, also, when you have a lot of excess circulating short-chain fatty acids, because you're eating a high-fiber diet or maybe on a ketosis diet, you're going to have a appetite regulation in the brain, because these short-chain fatty acids travel up through the vagus nerve, they travel into the brainstem, and they can actually reduce our appetite. So there's a lot of science behind these short-chain fatty acids and all the positive things they do. And the two ways that we get them is from a ketosis or a high-fiber diet. Now, one of the things these short-chain fatty acids do is in our chromosomes, at the end of our chromosomes, as we age, they begin to unravel, which is not a good thing because our chromosomes, which is our DNA, becomes shorter as we get older. That leads to more mutation, more diseases. These short-chain fatty acids literally can go and bind to enzymes that are responsible for unraveling and actually decrease. It actually stops these enzymes from unraveling in the chromosomes. And this study talks a little bit about it, and it talks about how, and I'll blow it up a little bit, how understanding the short-chain fatty acids mediated inhibition of these areas in the chromosomes that actually are responsible for reducing inflammation and a good anti-aging, right? Because we don't want our chromosomes to get shorter because that's a sign of aging. So it would make sense, right, that people would say, wow, a ketosis diet, it actually helps with aging. And I get where they're coming from because of the short-chain fatty acids. But when you're doing a plant diet and you're getting a lot of fibers, you're not going to get any downside, because there are some downsides to the keto diet. There are some upsides, but there are some downsides. So with the downsides, and I just want to show another slide here before I move on, where a lot of our immune cells also have these receptor sites that allow these short-chain fatty acids to attach to, and it makes those immune cells powerhouses, okay? So if they did a good job before, they're going to do an even better job creating more anti-inflammatory conditions within our body because of these short-chain fatty acids. But now let's talk about some of the downsides of excess fats, because excess fats that accumulate in non-fatty tissue, like in muscle cells and liver cells, can cause problems. On a keto diet, you're going to have a lot of excess fats, period. It can also cause gut issues. Now, I do want to mention these short-chain fatty acids. There are receptor sites on the gut, and it could have been why our 24-year-old ulcerative colitis had remission, because these short-chain fatty acids can attach to receptor sites on the gut. There's certain areas in the gut that can affect a positive benefit in immunity in the gut. Short-chain fatty acids produce a positive effect in gut immunity in itself. Okay, so a high-fiber diet actually helps the gut, helps other areas when they travel throughout the body. So part of helping with inflammatory bowel disease is bringing short-chain fatty acids. And that's why with diverticulosis and other inflammatory bowel diseases, these fibers have been advocated as being positive. We want to have a diet with high fiber because we want to get these short-chain fatty acids. The problem with a keto diet is these excess fats can cause other problems, other areas, like clogging up the receptor sites and also creating more gut dysbiosis, imbalance in the gut. When there's too many fats, okay? Now, if you're on a keto diet, you're producing a lot of short-chain fatty acids, this could probably negate some of that. But if you're eating a diet high in fats, because maybe you did a keto Monday through Friday and then you binged on the weekend, that's not a keto diet, by the way. But these high fats create an imbalance in the gut that actually creates a permeability situation, okay? So the intestinal barrier system in the gut becomes really broken down with a lot of excess fats. And this, in the green highlight, I'm going to read straight from the study, there is mounting evidence that consumption of excess dietary fats can enhance intestinal permeability, and it can cause these modulation expression, the distribution of these TJ proteins that actually cause a disruption in the barrier wall of the intestinal tract, and also can cause problems with bile acids. And bile acids, when you have an imbalance there, that in itself can cause some gut bacteria disruption. Bottom line, highlighted in the yellow, it says, in addition, high-fat diets enhance intestinal permeability, directly stimulating pro-inflammatory signaling cascades that cause the barrier disrupting cytokines, which are barrier disrupting immune cells. That's what those cytokines mean. So we do see this with a high-fat diet. Many studies talk about this, okay? So also it leads to leaky gut, can also cause gluten sensitivity, because once that gut becomes disabled, once you start getting this imbalance of these bacterias, then it's a domino effect for other problems in the gut as well. So bottom line, I want to go back and review, because it might have sounded confusing because I'm saying good and bad with the keto. So, but the point is, I want to bring up the science behind why do people do keto. First of all, macronutrients have a reason why the body wants you to keep proteins at a certain level. Keto diet, that's not a problem. Fiber on a keto diet is a problem because you're not getting all the fibers. You're not getting fibers from the beans. You're not getting fibers from the grains. So fibers create all these different species of bacteria. Super important for a healthy gut. When you're on a keto diet, you're only getting a certain number of those species. That's the way it works, folks. That's what a fiber diet does. It creates these healthy bacterias. So we're probably going to be somewhat deficient in all the possibilities on creating some really good bacterias in the gut. Now, I'm not saying a keto diet doesn't help with the short-chain fatty acids in the gut, because it's creating these ketones, which can also be a positive thing. So a lot of times people will say, oh, a keto diet helps the gut, only from the standpoint of the short-chain fatty acids. Carbohydrates are absolutely going to be at a low level. Muscles will not be happy about this. Muscles want to have a certain amount of glycogen, all right? So a lot of people poo-poo this. You can go without it because the kidney does create glucose, but not at the capacity, that's the key word, at the capacity that the muscles would like. Muscles have a temperament. They like carbs. And when you decrease the muscle from the amount of carbs they would like, I'm not saying the liver can't feed some glucose, but it's a capacity. It's a glycogen capacity. This is a real thing with muscles. That's where some of the binging and what makes it super hard for people to stay on a keto diet is because the muscles rebel. They begin to really crave carbs. And this can create the cheat day. That's why you're great Monday through Friday, and then you go out to dinner and forget it. Breadbasket gone. Really tough to control your appetite when you're dealing with muscle glycogen capacity issues. So when you're teaching people to eat, you want to teach them that these macronutrients have a reason why they're in this balanced situation. And fat grams, I usually try to keep the fat between 25 and 35%. Okay? So, and there's a lot of reason behind that. I've explained some of them. So, bottom line, when we look at the keto diet and why it's gotten such really good publicity, is I'm going to really say it's coming down to the short chain fatty acids. To me, that's like the biggest benefit of the keto diet. That these ketones are short chain fatty acids. They're either produced in the gut or they're produced in the liver, this ketogenesis, these ketones. And these short chain fatty acids do wonderful things. Now, what I believe is that the body created two ways to get to these short chain fatty acids because they're so doggone important. So many cells have receptor sites for them that the body said, look, if we're in a situation where we can't get a hold of plants and the only thing available to eat are fats and protein, doggone it, we're going to make sure you get short chain fatty acids. And that would make a lot of sense because the body's saying we do not want to not have these short chain fatty acids because they're so important for our health. So we're going to make sure you either get it because you're eating an all-fat diet and animal diet because you're out in the wild and the only thing you could eat was buffalo, right? Or we're going to make sure you can get it from plants. Bottom line, you can get these short-chain fatty acids from either extreme. So from my perspective, there really is, the only thing with gut fermentation is the more gut bacteria imbalances you have, the harder it is, like IBS, and a lot of people have terrible guts, and this is probably a whole nother live stream. But when they do create a lot of these bad bacteria, it makes it difficult to digest foods. And now you have a problem with bloating and gas and all these issues. So I can understand why it's difficult for some people to get all the short chain fatty acids because it's uncomfortable, because they have this bloating and belching. But that's really from having a gut over a period of time on the typical American diet. A lot of processed foods. The gut becomes less in shape. The bad bacteria begin to take over. And then that's when the IBS really comes down. A lot of people say, well, let's just eliminate all the foods that you can't eat. My program as a dietitian is I try to bring them in smaller quantities. Don't want you uncomfortable, but I want to try to build back the gut bacteria, good digestive enzymes. I want the gut to go back to being able to digest and handle foods that are actually good for you. So when we look at a keto diet, bottom line, if you're in a state of starvation, excess physical exertion, and you're only hunting buffalo, the body wants to make sure that these short chain fatty acids can still provide a health benefit for you. And this is where I think we see all the studies showing keto being of a benefit. But the keto also creates an imbalance, can make it difficult to stay on it because there's some real biochemistry why the macronutrients want to stay the way they do in a certain percentage. And this can cause an issue of craving more carbs, trying to stay on it. Sure, if you have insulin resistance, I can understand if you're diabetic why carbs are going to be a problem, but it's not really about eliminating them. It's really about understanding how to balance them, which is what I do in my program is I teach us how to eat the macronutrients in the right percentages and knowing how to balance those meals accordingly. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about, should I do keto or should I not? So my I guess bottom line to this is that I believe that a keto diet could have some benefits for certain people, but it's not the mainstay for how you live your life truly in a balanced homeostasis healthy way. Because although it produces some benefit, there's also some downside to it. So I hope that was helpful. I'm trying to stay respectful of that 1 hour live stream. I don't want you guys to be sitting here for hours. So I'll leave it open if anybody has any questions. Go ahead and you can put it in the chat. And Sam, if you want to go to the chat and we can check that out.
I don't think we have any questions today. We're all good.
Okay. Until next time.
Don't forget to like.
Oh, don't forget to like. And also you can go to my website, and let me point you in that direction. And you can check out my program. I have a membership, and I talk all about how to eat with these macronutrients and balance your macronutrients so you don't have to do the keto diet. So until next week or next video, I will see you guys later, and thank you so much.